Hi, welcome back. Here I am. I'm going to put another coat of varnish on this 13-course lute. It's already had one coat of varnish a couple of days ago, so this is the second coat. I flattened the varnish, the first coat of varnish, with some steel wool, some 4-0 steel wool, and I used a tack cloth to clean it up. Now I've got two more tack cloths that I'm going to use in succession to give it a careful final wipe down and get all of the dust off of it. So I can sort of use my hand, use my fingernails to sort of rub in the edges and the crevices there, especially around the capping strip, to get any clumps of dust out. Now you'll notice a difference from the last video where I was flattening the varnish. I was using my green bench pad. Now I've switched that out for a white piece of card that I can rest the lute's edge on, the belly edge, as I clean this thing and as I varnish. Okay, so there's one tack cloth. Now the cleanest tack cloth, and the stickiest one, because it's the newest one. And I will also use these tack cloths on my varnish sample, which is just a piece of the same material, rosewood, that I prepared in the same way as I've done the back. All the layers of browns and sub-varnishes and whatnot, sizing and this and that. So there we go. It's all ready to put varnish on. So I'll start with this first. And it's a good idea. Like I've actually put second coats of varnish on a couple of lutes already today, so my brush is pretty wet, pretty saturated, and so there's no problem using it. But if I'm starting out with a dry brush, this is a good way to sort of begin the process, is to, instead of starting out on the lute, start out with a varnish sample and get some varnish worked into the brush. Okay, there we go. You can see I'm sort of working the varnish in as much as I can into the pores. And of course I'm brushing with the grain. The varnish will flatten out on its own, but I want to give it a good chance to do so by not, leaving some too obvious brush marks in it. Okay, so I'll set that aside. It's over here. And now I'll start with the lute itself. Now on the first coat of varnish, let me explain. There are 21 ribs on this thing, and I usually varnish 2 at a time. So when I started the first coat of varnish yesterday, I started with 2 ribs here, and then I did the next 2, and the next 2, and the next 2, and the next 2. And you end up with a single rib over here. So now, what I'm going to do today is alternate that. I'm going to start with varnishing 1 rib here, and then 2, and 2, and 2. So I'm overlapping the rib joints where I finish off the varnish. And that helps me to guard against, piling up varnish at the same rib joint. Okay, so I alternate that every time I do a coat of varnish. So this is what I do. I get some varnish on my brush, and I start brushing an inch or 2 away from the neck joint, and I'll just get some varnish on there and start moving it around, and I work my way back to the neck joint. And the neck isn't masked off or anything like that. I'm just using my brush and working the varnish back into the joint. And you can usually do a pretty accurate job. I'm not slopping varnish onto the neck or anything. I might get a little bit on the neck, but I can clean that up pretty easily when I finish up the neck. And that'll be after I put the peg box on. Okay, so I've done an area of about 6-8 inches, something like that. And then I'll just carry on a bit bit farther. And sort of brush varnish out to the edge of the rib. And then brush it out straight and flat. And what I'm doing, maybe you can see here, is I'm brushing slightly over the rib joint. I want to just, use a bit of a dry brush and just be on the rib joint so that there is some coverage on that next rib. And I'll just come back to the capping strip. I don't want to get any varnish on the top of the capping strip. I do want to get it on the edge of the capping strip, however. And I can use my brush to sort of work varnish into that little round cutaway in the capping strip end. And just a bit of the rib there. And then I'll just brush that out flat and straight. Okay, looks pretty good. Now we'll go on to the next two ribs. Started off with one. Now I'll be working in pairs. There. So I just get some varnish onto the rib and start working it. Work it backwards toward the rib or toward the neck joint. There we go again. Same sort of thing. Just you can brush it tight into that corner. I'm using a fairly vigorous brush stroke here. I want to work this stuff into the pores as much as possible. And I want to just brush up to and slightly over where I've already brushed onto this rib beside the rib that I've already varnished. Okay, so I'm just sort of linking them together. Okay, work in sections. Get some varnish on, spread it out, work it in. I can feel it begin to pull when I've got it sort of worked into place. And then I know I got to finish up and get some more varnish and work on the next section. And I'm working varnish back into the area that I've just covered so that everything sort of links up together. And I don't, like I said, I don't sort of pile up varnish in any one place. Okay, I can sort of pick it up by the capping strip here and have a look and see how my brushing looks. I think it looks pretty good, and I can move on. So I'll be working, like I said, 2 ribs at a time all the way across, and I'll just shut off the video for a second, for a few minutes, not, so I don't bore you. I'll be right back.